Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling to a place more decadent than a TikTok chef's fridge. Paris in the early 1900s. Not the struggling artist Paris. Not the three poets in a garret eating baguette crumbs in Paris. No, I mean the Paris of the filthy rich. The kind of rich where your breakfast costs more than your first car, and your problems include deciding which hat to wear to lunch on a Tuesday. So before you dive into a pillow softer than a Rothschild's sense of irony, take a moment to like, subscribe, and maybe leave a comment below, preferably something fancier than first, but only if you actually enjoy this. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that white noise, and get as comfortable as possible. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what life was actually like for the disgustingly rich in Belle Epoque Paris? Did they really eat gold for breakfast? How long did it take to put on a single glove? Were there professional dog walkers for your miniature greyhound? Or did you just let the butler do it? Did these people really bathe in milk? Or is that just a lactose-intolerant fever dream? If you dropped your monocle in your consommé, did you have to tip the soup? Would you survive a single afternoon in a world where you need a different hat for each course of dinner? Or would you get thrown out of the opera for using the wrong fork to scratch your nose? Congratulations! You've just woken up in Paris. The year is 1905. You are richer than sin, softer than cashmere, and at least 12 people are employed solely to prevent you from ever touching a doorknob. Good luck. You open your eyes beneath a ceiling so high you need binoculars to see the cobwebs. The sheets are Egyptian cotton. The pillows are stuffed with the down of birds extinct everywhere except your mattress. And your first waking breath is scented with a breeze of imported lavender, thanks to the maid, whose only job is to fluff your linens. Your room? It's larger than most Parisian apartments, and you have no idea where the door is because, honestly, you've never had to find it yourself. There's a faint hush of footsteps on the thickest rug you've ever walked on, although, let's be honest, you haven't actually walked on it, because that's what slippers and staff are for. The rug was hand-woven in some far-off land, likely by people who would faint at the thought of someone using it as a path to the bathroom. A gentle cough comes from somewhere behind the drapes. A discreet signal that your valet has been waiting for you to wake up. Standing so still, you wonder if he powers down overnight like an anxious Roomba. You stretch. Careful. Not too much. No one wants to pull something at this hour, especially when you have at least 3 appointments with people whose names you can't quite remember. The sheets are so crisp and smooth that turning over feels like gliding across the surface of a particularly judgmental glacier. And yes, the monogrammed embroidery is always facing up. It's a house rule, possibly older than the actual house. The light in the room isn't harsh or sudden. The curtains are pulled back with theatrical precision, allowing Parisian sunshine to creep in with a faint golden glow. You're never woken by sunlight slapping you in the face, heavens, no. The goal here is to be coaxed from sleep as gently as possible, as if you're a croissant rising in an oven. The air is a careful blend of fresh breeze and perfume, because the windows have been cracked open for precisely 10 minutes. Any longer, and the risk of an unpleasant draft becomes too high for the standards of your insurance policy or your grandmother. You try to take stock of the room, but it's more like surveying a small, slightly intimidating kingdom. At the edge of your vision, an ornate dressing table, topped with enough perfumes and powders to supply a mid-sized apothecary. A chaise lounge, never actually lounged upon, but it looks nice in the portrait. Massive wardrobes guard the far wall, each containing outfits sorted by weather, mood, and potential scandals to be avoided. It smells expensive in here, not new money expensive, which is usually just the smell of carpet glue and desperation, but old money expensive, like polished wood, books no one reads, and the faintest hint of lemon wax. There's also a lingering whiff of fresh bread drifting up from the kitchens. You haven't seen the kitchen in years, but you know that somewhere down there, someone has been awake since 4 a.m. just to ensure your first whiff of the day isn't something tragic like boiled cabbage. As you sit up, you notice immediately, because you've been trained to, how perfectly everything is placed. The glass of water on the nightstand is always chilled to the exact degree you prefer. The flowers in the vase are replaced daily, sometimes twice, in case you are struck by the sudden urge to appreciate hydrangeas. Even the fire in the hearth, if it's winter, is arranged in a way that says, "We could survive the apocalypse in here, but let's not make a fuss about it." And of course, your staff. There are more people quietly working in this room than you have Facebook friends. The valet who brings you your slippers before your feet dare touch the floor. The chambermaid who disappears your pajamas and replaces them with a morning robe that somehow feels even softer than your sheets. The footman whose job it is to stand absolutely still and try not to look scandalized by anything he might see before 8 a.m. Your role in all this? Mainly to exist. To be gently nudged from dreamland to reality in a way that minimizes physical exertion and maximizes your sense of superiority over, well, everyone. It's an immersive experience in luxury, and you don't even have to get out of bed for it. But if you do, you might catch a glimpse of yourself in the gilded mirror, hair perfectly tousled, eyes slightly unfocused, and for a brief, bewildering second, you wonder, how does anyone live like this? But don't worry, the answer arrives promptly, in the form of a polite cough and a cup of hot chocolate placed on a silver tray. You take a sip, settle back against your mountain of pillows, and remember, this is just the start of the day. The only real challenge ahead is making it to breakfast without accidentally starting a labor dispute over the temperature of your bathwater. And so, you begin another morning as one of the filthiest rich in 1900s Paris. Life is soft, scented, and slightly surreal, and you haven't even put on your socks yet. A discreet knock signals the arrival of your valet. You don't just get out of bed, you are extracted, like a precious relic, and gently ushered into the day by people who have studied the ancient art of not making eye contact before noon. Before you can yawn, a tray appears. Hot chocolate, pastries, and the bottle of imported tooth powder that costs more than your cook's yearly salary. There is a strange magic to the way your morning unfurls, as if someone hired a symphony conductor and told him his entire orchestra would consist of servants armed with monogrammed napkins. Your valet, always silent, always dignified, is the general of this operation. His main job? Ensuring that your bare feet never, under any circumstances, touch a cold floor. Should your toes graze anything unheated, rest assured there will be a full report filed, and someone will be spoken to. The slippers he offers are soft enough to make Clouds file a class action complaint. You are gently assisted to your dressing table, where an assortment of soaps, tonics, and mysterious French serums await. The soap alone comes in a box that looks like it should contain an engagement ring. You have a fresh towel every morning, sometimes two, just in case you feel like a quick existential crisis between brushing your teeth and breakfast. The air smells like rosewater, talcum, and the faint, lingering dread of not living up to your family name. The tooth powder itself is a minor marvel, made from crushed pearls, imported mint, and the kind of secrets that, in another world, would have powered the space program. As you brush, a maid hovers discreetly, ready to hand you a glass of water, or if you cough, to fetch a specialist in unexpected morning distress. You'll never know the brand of your toothbrush because it's replaced the moment it looks even vaguely used. In fact, there are entire economies in Paris devoted solely to keeping you in pristine dental health. Something peasants of the time might have envied, if only they had teeth left to envy with. Next comes the ritual of hair taming. which is not to be confused with hair brushing. A skilled hairdresser appears, seemingly summoned by the scent of hot chocolate, to run a comb through your bedhead with the delicacy of a museum conservator restoring a priceless tapestry. If you are a woman, there are hot irons, pins, ribbons, and the kind of hairspray that could fix both your curls and the French railway schedule. For gentlemen, the challenge is to appear artfully disheveled, but never actually messy. A hairstyle that says, "I just woke up this handsome, but only after 3 people tried very hard." Now, on to the robe. Not just any robe. This is silk, custom fitted, and probably costs more than the annual budget for most public schools. It slides onto your shoulders with the weightlessness of a broken promise. You are briefly enveloped in luxury. And, because this is 1900s Paris, there's probably a small monogram somewhere to remind you whose bathrobe you're not allowed to borrow at the next house party. The staff orchestrates all of this with the sort of discipline that would make the Prussian army jealous. Someone polishes your shoes in the next room, because nothing says good morning quite like the smell of leather and boot polish mixing with raspberry jam. The head housemaid checks your breakfast for temperature, arrangement, and pastry symmetry. A real job, apparently, for the truly pampered. And as you sit there, swaddled in silk, sipping your hot chocolate and nibbling a pain of chocolate still warm from the oven, you realize that the only thing you've accomplished today is existing beautifully, lavishly, and with the vague suspicion that if left to your own devices, you'd probably wander into the pantry and forget why you came in. Before you can ponder anything deeper, the valet returns with your first letter of the day, a handwritten note on thick cream paper, sealed with the sort of wax that says, "This person knows your mother." You don't open your own correspondence, of course. That's the secretary's job, who will be here as soon as he's finished alphabetizing your excuses for not attending last night's gala. If you're wondering what all this feels like, imagine being the star of your own daily opera. Except the only arias are muttered in the hallway, and the only real drama is whether your pastry is flaky enough to pass muster. Meanwhile, somewhere outside, normal people are making their own coffee, brushing their own teeth, and nobody is paid to monitor their morning mood swings. But in this palace, you are royalty, or at least you're playing the part, surrounded by a supporting cast that exists for the sole purpose of ensuring you never encounter a lukewarm croissant or a single thread out of place. This is the morning ritual for the filthy rich in 1900s Paris. A daily celebration of soft fabrics, gentle voices, and the delicate, relentless choreography of luxury. And somehow, you haven't even put on your real clothes yet. Dressing yourself is a team sport, but only if the team is comprised of professionals with advanced degrees in buttons. If you're a lady, prepare for a daily wrestling match with whalebone corsets and at least 6 layers of fabric. Gentlemen, try keeping your cool as 3 people fight to synchronize your cufflinks. By the time you're dressed, you've burned more calories than a commoner does in a week. Let's start with the basics. No one in your social class actually expects you to dress yourself. That's what the staff is for. Left to your own devices, you might confuse the petticoat for a lampshade and emerge for breakfast with half your waistcoat on backwards. Here in the palaces and hotels particuliers of 1900s Paris, you are essentially a living, breathing art project. One that requires the steady hands and deep patience of an entire wardrobe department. Your valet or lady's maid is your stylist, therapist, and sometimes personal referee, all rolled into one. For women, getting dressed is less about slipping something on and more about engineering a wearable fortress. First, there's the chemise, as close to casual as you're allowed. Then, the corset arrives, a device designed by someone with unresolved issues. It's yanked, tugged, and laced with military precision, reducing your waist and your lung capacity to numbers that haven't been seen since the French Revolution. Forget deep breaths. Breathing is for people who don't own pearls. Layers are added. Petticoats, underskirts, overskirts, bustles, and more mysterious garments with names like modesty panel and corset cover. Each one must be positioned perfectly. If something sags or bunches, the lady's maid will fix it, frown, and possibly pray for your soul. Gloves, of course, come next, each finger carefully rolled in, because heaven forbid you get a wrinkle before you reach the breakfast table. Hats? Oh, hats are an entire separate performance. Today's headpiece is a carefully curated monument to questionable taste. Perched with the aid of no fewer than 15 hairpins, 2 ribbons, and the hopes of your entire social circle. There are feathers, flowers, or, if you're feeling simple, a delicate veil that manages to be both demure and threatening. Earrings are clipped on, a brooch is stabbed through at least one layer, and a cameo somewhere signals to the world that your great-great-aunt was somebody once. Meanwhile, the gentlemen are experiencing their own unique blend of stress and indignity. The day starts with starched linen, so starched, in fact, that you could probably use your collar as a self-defense weapon. Shirts are pressed within an inch of their lives, and cuffs are so stiff you can't bend your wrists for the next 3 hours. Attaching the cufflinks is a contact sport, requiring at least 2 assistants, the patience of a monk and the upper body strength of a lumberjack. There are cravats to be tied, waistcoats to be buttoned, and trousers to be coaxed over layers of undergarments. Don't even get started on the shoes. Shined to a mirror finish, they're slipped on with a shoehorn wielded by a professional. If you attempt this yourself, you'll simply throw out your back and ruin the illusion of effortless grace. And yet, for all the chaos, the goal is simple: to appear as if you woke up like this. Not a hair out of place, no evidence of the frantic scrambling, and certainly no visible sweat. You glide down the hall, every pleat crisp, every button gleaming, and every seam straight, as if you don't notice the staff fanning themselves in the aftermath of your transformation. Naturally, there are hazards. A button will inevitably pop at the worst possible moment. A corset string might snap, catapulting you into the headlines of tomorrow's society pages. And then there's the perennial panic over matching accessories. Should your gloves be ecru or eggshell? And what shade is regret anyway? For men, the agony of choosing between the everyday walking stick and the special occasion cane can reduce even the toughest baron to existential despair. Let's not forget the seasonal suffering. Summer brings layers of wool and silk designed to cook you from the inside out, while winter's furs and velvets ensure that any attempt at exercise is promptly abandoned in favor of fainting artfully near a chaise lounge. If you ever wondered why portraits from the era look so serious, now you know. Everyone's just trying not to pass out or unbutton themselves by accident. So you stand, a walking sculpture, held together by pins, starch, and the mutual fear of social disgrace. Your reward? You get to do it all again, at least 3 more times today, for lunch, tea, and dinner. By the end, you're a masterpiece of fashion, endurance, and diplomatic small talk with your own reflection. Welcome to getting dressed in Belle Époque Paris, where elegance is pain, style is suffering, and the only thing tighter than your corset is your schedule. Forget cereal. Your breakfast is a multi-course ordeal. Soft-boiled eggs served in gold, caviar that's older than your youngest cousin, and pastries so delicate you feel guilty for chewing. There's a butler for the butter, a footman for the toast, and at least one decorative dog eyeing the sausages with generational resentment. Breakfast isn't a meal, it's an institution. You don't stumble into the kitchen bleary-eyed and microwave some oatmeal. No, you descend, or more accurately, are guided to the grand dining room. It's the kind of room that echoes with every step, because someone waxed the floor at dawn and the ceiling is so high you could store a zeppelin overhead. The table stretches on like a minor railway, decked in linens so starched they could double as fencing equipment. You don't sit wherever you want. There is a seating chart, and it's not negotiable. Your chair is always in the same spot, precisely 6 inches from the table's edge. The correct distance for reaching the silver, but not risking a sleeve in the marmalade. Your napkin isn't just folded. It's practically origami, shaped into a swan or, perhaps, on particularly creative days, an obscure reference to your family crest. If you try to refold it yourself, someone will intervene for the sake of tradition, dignity, and the future of European breakfast culture. The first course arrives. Perhaps a selection of fruit, peeled, sliced, and arranged in an artful mosaic that looks suspiciously like last night's centerpiece. You marvel, you nibble, and you pretend not to notice when the butler gives the slightest cough of disapproval as you reach for the melon out of order. Every move is a test. Which spoon, which fork, which I don't even know what this is utensil do you use for the next mystery on your plate? Your only guide is the butler, who, with the solemnity of a priest, gently nods to indicate the correct instrument. It's like playing a very high-stakes game of Clue. Only the murder weapon is a grapefruit spoon. Next comes the eggs. And these are not ordinary eggs. They arrive soft-boiled, balanced on golden stands, their shells so flawless you wonder if someone polishes them by hand. Salt is offered from a tiny crystal bowl, and if you accidentally use too much, no one will say anything. But you'll sense the footman's silent heartbreak. Toast soldiers are perfectly aligned, standing to attention as if awaiting a general's inspection. And yes, there is a dedicated toast footman, because the toast must never, under any circumstances, arrive lukewarm. Caviar follows, because it's not really breakfast unless you're eating something that once belonged to a sturgeon with better health care than most of Paris. The caviar is spooned out using a tiny utensil made of mother of pearl, a detail so specific you wonder if there's an underground black market for breakfast-appropriate serving spoons. You take a bite, pretending you aren't thinking about what it actually tastes like. At least it's salty enough to justify the next round of pastries. Ah, the pastries. A tray arrives with options: croissants, pain au chocolat, fruit tarts, and little cakes whose only purpose in life is to fall apart gracefully when bitten. These are the real stars of the meal. Pillowy, flaky, and so fragile you can hear them sigh when you pick them up. Eating one is an exercise in guilt and gratitude, especially with the family dog stationed at your feet, deploying puppy eyes that suggest he remembers when your ancestors stormed the Bastille. Drinks are another event. Forget just coffee. You're presented with a selection. Will it be café au lait, hot chocolate, or perhaps a tisane, poured from a pot so ornate it could have its own salon in the Louvre? The butler pours, the footman offers cream, and you do your best to look like someone who's always known how to pronounce Darjeeling without an existential crisis. Meanwhile, the conversation is just as curated as the menu. Polite inquiries about your sleep are followed by discussions about art, the latest scandal, or what colour the Duchess Brustund, Sieve, Ind of Pros, wore to the opera last night. The newspaper is brought in, already ironed flat so your hands won't be sullied by ink. Any mention of real-world problems, poverty, politics, or the price of coal is politely ignored in favour of lighter topics, such as whether the neighbour's peacock is really that loud, or if anyone has seen the new pastry chef cry yet. Breakfast finally winds down, not with a sigh of relief, but a gentle nod to tradition. Someone mentions the schedule for the rest of the day, which somehow already includes 2 more meals, a carriage ride, and 3 opportunities to change outfits. As you rise from the table, a servant quietly sweeps away the evidence of your excessive consumption. And the dog follows, still convinced his luck will change. And so, you have survived the breakfast banquet. You are nourished, exhausted, and only marginally prepared for the day's true challenge, pretending you're not hungry again by 10 a.m. Unlike most Parisians, you don't have to trek down the hall with a candle and a prayer. Your bathroom is palatial, with running water, hot and cold, because you're just that special. If you fancy a bath, someone has to carry in buckets of milk, which, incidentally, does not leave the room smelling like anything you'd want to revisit. But let's rewind. The moment you step into your private lavatory, a word here that means indoor spa/water temple, you're greeted by the scent of rose oil, lemon balm, and freshly scrubbed tile. The floor is heated, of course, because the trauma of stepping barefoot onto cold stone is best left to the lower classes and 19th century novels. Your chambermaid was in here an hour ago, fluffing towels like she's competing in the Towel Olympics, and restocking your perfume shelf with tiny glass bottles worth more than your least favorite cousin's annual allowance. Your bathtub isn't just a tub. It's a porcelain colossus, carved like a Greco-Roman monument to the human desire to be unreasonably warm and dramatically wet. Claw feet, of course, because if your bath doesn't stand on the feet of a mythological beast, are you really bathing? A candelabra glows in the corner, and someone's left a folded silk robe nearby, just in case you forget how important you are. If it's bath day, and honestly, it often is, because being this rich is exhausting, you have choices. Regular water is boring. You can request milk, champagne, herbal infusions, or some sort of concoction involving crushed violets and essence of tranquility, which smells a lot like anxiety and lavender. Of course, these ingredients don't magically appear. Someone, usually a maid who draws straws with her co-workers, must carry each bucket up the stairs and pour it in by hand, like a particularly polite waterfall. Getting into the bath is its own ritual. There are no awkward leg swings or slippery near-death experiences. No, you are gently lowered by your maid's steady hand and positioned at exactly the right depth, so the water laps artfully at your collarbone. The temperature? Perfect. Always. If it's not, the water is drained and refilled before you can even lift an eyebrow. The standard of luxury here is, if you shiver, someone gets fired. And once you're in, you stay there. For a while, reading poetry, sipping something herbal, pretending not to hear the staff whispering about the time you fell asleep and had to be fished out like a soft, expensive dumpling. On a good day, you emerge pink, perfumed, and thoroughly moisturized. On a bad day, you emerge pink, perfumed, and 10 minutes late to your third outfit change. Let's not forget the lavatory itself, a gleaming porcelain throne of progress. Most people in Paris are still negotiating with chamber pots and shared outhouses. You have a water closet that flushes with the silent dignity of a royal wave. There's a gold handle, a lace-trimmed toilet paper holder, and an emergency bell in case something terrible happens, like realizing there's only one soap. Grooming in here is no joke either. Your mirror is perfectly lit to ensure you never see your pores. There's a tray of grooming instruments so intimidatingly polished it looks like a dental surgery kit. And your personal barber or maid will handle anything too fiddly. Razors are honed daily, hairbrushes laid out like cutlery, and your nail scissors are probably encrusted with rubies, because hygiene should sparkle. And when it's all over, when you're dry, powdered, scented, and draped in freshly ironed leisurewear, you are presented with a warm towel, a final spritz of eau de grandeur, and a mirror to check that you look like someone who's never known the touch of a lukewarm sponge. So yes, while most of the city is battling over public washrooms and washing their socks in the Seine, You're lounging in a bathtub big enough to host a regatta. Because when you're filthy rich in 1900s Paris, cleanliness isn't just next to godliness. It's next to a custom bidet and a decorative fern that cost more than most people's furniture. Clothes aren't just about not being naked, they're social armor. Each morning, your wardrobe consults with the seasons, the social calendar, and your personal astrologer. And if you pick the wrong hat, prepare for stares sharper than your tailor's shears. Because in Belle Epoque Paris, your outfit doesn't just say who you are, it says who your grandparents were, what level of scandal you're currently entangled in, and whether or not you're invited to Countess Delacourte's garden soiree. One wrong hemline, and you might as well go live in the woods with the poets. The ritual begins with your lady's maid or valet opening the wardrobe. A towering armoire so grand it could legally qualify as a separate residence. Inside, rows upon rows of garments organized by mood, temperature, time of day, and likelihood of being featured in tomorrow's gossip column. There are entire shelves dedicated to light luncheon looks, accidental street sightings, and the deeply important I'm not trying too hard, but I did spend 5 hours getting dressed ensembles. Let's start with the ladies. Underpinnings first. Chemises, corsets, petticoats, and possibly a prayer. Your corset is laced tighter than your family's financial records, and while it may render breathing a fond memory, it does ensure the perfect silhouette, tiny waist, proud posture, and just enough discomfort to remind you you're winning at life. Over that comes a symphony of fabrics, silks, taffetas, lace overlays, embroidered panels, all assembled in such a way that movement is possible, but only if it's slow, graceful, and accompanied by soft piano music. Then comes the dress. Not just any dress, of course, but the correct dress. For late morning visits, you'll need a high-necked gown with demure sleeves and just a hint of scandal in the bustle. For afternoon strolls, perhaps something with delicate embroidery and a matching parasol that doubles as a weapon in cases of social emergency. Jewelry is subtle but expensive. Think diamonds whispering behind a veil, not screaming from your décolletage. Gentlemen, you're not off the hook either. Your morning suit must be tailored within a millimeter of your dignity. Trousers are pleated to military standards. Your waistcoat matches your cravat, and your cravat is tied so precisely it could serve as a map to social success. Shoes are shined to a level of polish typically reserved for fine mirrors, and gloves must be worn, white or grey only, unless you want to be mistaken for someone who speaks at dinner. And then, hats. Ah yes, the true apex of your ensemble. Women's hats in 1900s Paris are less fashion accessory, more architectural ambition. Some are adorned with silk flowers, others with entire birds, and one particularly memorable number has an actual taxidermied squirrel holding a fan. You don't question it. You just tilt your chin slightly, nod to the mirror, and try not to impale anyone in the carriage. For men, the hat is a symbol of status. Bowler, casual. Top hat, formal. Boater, you're going boating, obviously. If you show up to the wrong event with the wrong hat, don't expect to be offered champagne or forgiveness. Of course, there are unwritten rules, known only to those born into the right drawing rooms. Colours must reflect the season and your current mood. Jewellery must not outshine the hostess unless you're actively trying to start a feud. And woe betide the poor soul who wears the same gown to 2 different salons in the same week. You'll be socially buried faster than last season's opera program. But here's the secret no one admits. Getting dressed in 1900s Paris is exhausting. It's a full-time job masquerading as self-expression. You're expected to look effortless while wearing a combined 40 pounds of clothing, 3 layers of padding, and a hat that could double as an aviary. And yet, when you emerge, immaculate, gliding, impossibly stylish, you feel invincible. You've navigated the textile labyrinth and emerged victorious. You are a walking masterpiece, stitched together with precision, wealth, and just enough suffering to remind everyone that you are, in fact, better than them. Because in this world, fashion isn't frivolous. It's survival, it's warfare, and it's absolutely fabulous. You don't just walk in Paris, you parade. Preferably with a tiny dog and a hat that could pick up radio signals. The goal isn't exercise. It's to be seen by the right people and pretend you don't notice them noticing you. The morning promenade is a well-rehearsed ritual, and it has absolutely nothing to do with cardiovascular health. It's a slow-moving, high-stakes runway through the city's most fashionable parks and boulevards. An Olympic event in subtle nods and scandalous glances. You don't stretch beforehand, you pose. You don't check the weather, your maid does. And if it's below freezing, you simply add more lace. First comes the preparation. You've already changed into your walking outfit, because of course there's a separate ensemble for that. It's lighter than your breakfast dress, but heavier than your afternoon tea frock. For women, it includes gloves, a parasol, and a hat so large it should be registered as a shade structure. For men, it's a crisp morning suit, perfectly buttoned, with a walking stick that is never, under any circumstances, used for actual walking. Your dog, a purebred fluff with an expression of mild disdain, is essential. It doesn't walk so much as float beside you, tiny, useless, and probably named something ridiculous like Monsieur Bisou. The dog functions less as a pet and more as a social decoy. When conversation stalls or gossip becomes too spicy, you can always pretend to attend to Monsieur Bisou's mysterious need to sniff a lamppost. You step out onto the cobblestones like you're entering stage left. The Champs-Élysées, the Jardin du Luxembourg, or one of the city's quieter, tree-lined avenues, all become your personal catwalk. People stroll not for the destination, but for the carefully choreographed encounters. You pass acquaintances and arch-rivals alike, nodding just enough to acknowledge their existence, but not enough to imply actual affection. Along the way, you observe the same dozen people who always seem to be out at the same time. Madame Leclerc, in her aggressively floral bonnet, the Baron, whose cane click is faster than his gossip, and the mysterious widow in veils, who hasn't spoken aloud since 1897 but still manages to spark 5 new rumours a week. You make mental notes: who's wearing last season's sleeves, who has clearly been jilted, and who dared to walk without gloves. Scandalous. The benches are lined with women pretending not to watch, men pretending not to flirt, and children pretending not to exist. You may pause for a rest, if only to allow someone important to accidentally pass by and remark upon your posture. If you're lucky, a casual comment about the weather will blossom into a full exchange of family gossip that makes the morning worth enduring. Do not be fooled. This is not a leisurely stroll. This is surveillance in silk. You are collecting intelligence, testing social waters, and subtly reinforcing your place in the hierarchy of people who own far too many hats. You are seen, you are judged, and you are definitely judging right back. On particularly busy days, you may be joined by an entourage, friends, cousins, or the occasional hanger-on who's just charming enough to keep around but not quite charming enough to trust with a secret. Your group will drift like a fashionable amoeba through the promenade, breaking apart and reforming depending on who approaches, who must be avoided, and who is suddenly pretending to admire a tree to dodge an awkward conversation about marriage prospects. The entire ordeal lasts less than an hour, but it requires the same energy as a small diplomatic summit. By the time you return home, you're not winded, but you're socially exhausted. You've smiled just enough to be polite, gossiped just enough to stay relevant, and avoided that one guy who insists on talking about steam-powered bicycles. As you cross the threshold back into your estate, a servant takes your gloves, another removes your hat, and Monsieur Bisou is escorted to his private chaise lounge for recovery. You, too, collapse onto a chair, grateful that the most demanding part of your day, being publicly visible while pretending to be casually invisible, is done. You haven't broken a sweat, but you've definitely earned a second breakfast. Every morning brings a mountain of visiting cards. The rich don't text, they summon. Forget group chats, you network via hand-delivered paper. And there are rules about who can leave a card and who's worthy of a return call. One misstep, and you're socially exiled to the outer rings of brunch. Welcome to the intricate ballet of Belle Époque social life, where status is measured in cardstock thickness and font elegance. These little rectangles of communication are not mere niceties. They're tactical instruments in the ongoing chess match of aristocratic relevance. Every corner is trimmed, every initial embossed, and every delivery timed to perfection. Even the envelope seal matters. Too casual, and it implies you're poor. Too ornate, and it screams desperation. The first sign that your morning is about to be socially complicated is the sound of the butler clearing his throat ominously as he brings in a silver tray. On it, a selection of visiting cards. Some familiar, some hopeful, and one that makes your blood run cold. You don't touch them yourself, of course. Your secretary, or, if you're really well-staffed, your social secretary, reads them aloud, sorting them like tarot cards that tell the story of your standing in Parisian society. Each card carries expectations. If Madame de Varney left one, you are required to return the gesture, preferably within 48 hours, and with slightly better paper stock. If you fail to do so, she'll assume you're offended, sick, or dead, and she'll spread all three versions at her next salon. Some cards are merely tokens, left by people of lower rank, hoping to curry favor. These are swept aside delicately, placed in the cordial but unnecessary pile. And then there are the dreaded double corners turned down. A subtle paper fold that signals the caller actually came to your home but was turned away. Maybe you weren't receiving. Maybe you were pretending not to be home. Either way, it's now your move. Do you return the card with a corner turned down? Do you pretend you never received it? Or do you escalate with a personal visit? A social risk akin to asking someone to co-sign your emotional mortgage. When it's your turn to send cards, the process becomes even more elaborate. You don't just write your name. You must include the day and hour you are receiving. That is, when you are available to pretend to enjoy small talk and macarons. The cards are then hand-delivered by a footman dressed in quiet elegance. He must not run, loiter, or, heaven forbid, arrive sweaty. It's all about grace, posture, and correct pronunciation of monsieur. Afternoon is often dedicated to the actual calls themselves. Those strange, ritualistic visits where people stop by for exactly 15 minutes to compliment your curtains and imply that the Countess de Rochefort's daughter might be with child. You receive them in your drawing room, which has been pre-polished to a dangerous sheen, and you wear a specially chosen ensemble that says, "I'm effortlessly elegant but fully prepared to judge you." The conversation? A tightly controlled dance of flattery, gossip, and coded insults. You sip tea with the delicacy of a hummingbird and nod thoughtfully when someone mentions that poor Jean-Louis is still wearing last season's trousers. It's not cruel, it's survival. Fail to perform well during these calls, and you may find your next invitation to a gala mysteriously lost in the post. Succeed, and you move up one invisible notch in the hierarchy. Maybe someone mentions your name to a duchess. Maybe your daughter receives a proposal. Maybe the scandal about your cousin's gambling habit is ever so politely forgotten. By sunset, you've reviewed dozens of cards, made several visits, dodged at least one scandal, and successfully pretended to care about someone else's gout. You've spoken in pleasantries, smiled until your cheeks ache, and navigated enough unwritten rules to qualify for a PhD in passive-aggressive diplomacy. And yet, the tray arrives again tomorrow, because in 1900s Paris, if you're not calling or being called upon, you might as well not exist. Afternoons are for gathering in salons, sipping tea, and deploying conversational daggers with precision. The topics? Everything from politics to the scandalous behavior of the new American heiress who actually wore the same dress twice. Shocking. Welcome to the drawing room, a powder-scented arena where wit is weaponized, facial expressions are microscopic essays, and reputations rise and fall faster than your blood sugar after 3 petit fours. This is not small talk. This is a blood sport disguised with lace doilies. The room itself is designed to impress and disarm. Gilded mirrors reflect tasteful opulence back at you. Upholstered chairs are arranged in conversational clusters, like tiny social traps waiting to spring. On the table, tea, biscuits, and enough sugar cubes to fund a colonial war. If you're hosting, everything must be perfectly staged, fresh flowers, freshly ironed, napkins, and a pianist in the background softly playing something that sounds accidental but was actually rehearsed for 3 weeks. Guests arrive precisely on time, because being too early implies desperation, and being too late implies power you probably don't have. They're dressed for the occasion. Subdued elegance, just enough jewelry to show wealth, not enough to show effort. Everyone has already been briefed by their staff on who's attending, who's recently disgraced themselves, and which countess is likely to cry again over her 3rd divorce. Tea is poured with the elegance of a royal decree. It is not, under any circumstances, simply drunk. You sip. You cradle the cup. You gently tilt your head as if pondering something deep, like the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, when really you're wondering if Madame Lafarge's pearls are real this time, or just another clever lie. Conversation begins innocuously enough. Comments on the weather, the opera, or the latest landscape someone bought and immediately forgot about. But this is just the warm-up. The real sport begins when someone drops a carefully sharpened remark like, "Oh, how brave of her to wear that colour in this light." Cue the subtle gasps, the lowered eyes, the nervous flutter of fans. The victim smiles. The wound is clean. Everyone here is fluent in subtext. She has such energy means she's completely unhinged. He's been rather social lately means he's drunk in public again. Their marriage seems strong means I give it 6 weeks. Tops. If you don't understand these codes, you'll end up thinking you've been complimented when, in fact, your reputation is already halfway to ruins. Each guest brings their own agenda. Some come to gather information, others to test rumors, and a few simply to enjoy the chaos. The American heiress is always good for a topic. Her accent, her manners, her tendency to talk to people below the rank of Viscount. She's either refreshing or horrifying, depending on how well your investments are doing. Occasionally someone will mention politics, but only in the vaguest, most ornamental way. "I hear the chamber is in turmoil again," is said with the same tone as, "The lilies are late this season. More urgent are matters like whether the prince has a new mistress, whether the duchess's son is sick again, red, disgraced, or if someone has been seen without gloves in public." Again, the drawing room is also a space of alliances. Friendships are forged over mutual disdain, and feuds are sustained with smiles. If someone touches your arm while talking, they trust you. If someone adjusts their hat while looking at you, they don't. The room is filled with silent gestures, fluttered eyelashes, precisely timed sips, and the kind of laughter that doesn't reach the eyes. And then, just as the gossip reaches a delightful crescendo, someone casually mentions that Lady Dupont's niece might be in trouble. A tray of fresh pastries appears, and the conversation shifts like a well-choreographed ballet. Reputations are left hanging mid-air as everyone momentarily discusses almond flour. Eventually, guests begin to drift out, each one leaving behind a little scent of perfume, judgment, and social residue. The hostess nods, smiles, and pretends she isn't already compiling mental notes for the next guest list. And you survive, if not triumph, with your status intact and a slightly sore cheek from all the polite smiling. Because here in 1900s Paris, the drawing room isn't where the day slows down. It's where it sharpens. One sip of tea at a time. Every self-respecting rich person owns a private library, mostly to impress visitors. The number of books you've read? Irrelevant. The number you can wave around while discussing ideas? Crucial. Bonus points for quoting Voltaire with a mouthful of brandy. This sacred space, usually nestled between the billiard room and the second drawing room, is less about reading and more about optics. Floor-to-ceiling shelves groan under the weight of leather-bound volumes that may or may not be hollow. A rolling ladder sits in the corner, not because you need to reach anything, but because it looks intelligent and vaguely romantic. You haven't actually used it. Your valet tried once and bruised his dignity. The room smells like polished mahogany, pipe smoke, and fatherly disappointment. Heavy velvet curtains filter the light just enough to make every conversation feel important, even if it's about whether Proust is overrated or just understood only by the worthy. A fire crackles in the hearth, adding that crucial hint of warmth, danger, and just a touch of theatrical smoke damage to your rare copy of The Divine Comedy. Your desk is massive, too large really, a holdover from a time when letters were handwritten and dignity came in fountain pen ink. It is always cluttered with just the right mix of correspondence, wax seals, and the occasional open book you happen to be reading. Your reading glasses rest casually nearby. Despite your eyesight being perfect, they're for effect. You sometimes forget they're fake. But make no mistake, this library is not for solitude. It's a stage, and every visitor knows their role. Upon entering, the guest must pause, perform a slow sweep of the room, and say something like, "Ah, Montaigne." You nod, as if you too were just revisiting SI this morning while pondering the decline of Western civilization. In truth, you were looking for your dog's chew toy, which is now wedged under the wealth of nations. Afternoon hours are when the library truly comes alive. This is the time for deep conversation, by which we mean loud, passionate disagreement, disguised as philosophical insight. Subjects range from the classics to current affairs to that one poem you wrote in 1896 and continue to bring up with zero prompting. Brandy is poured from a decanter shaped like an aristocratic hippo, and cigars are offered with a gravity usually reserved for duels. Guests sink into armchairs with names like the Maximilian or the Churchill recliner. You discuss Rousseau's take on liberty, even if you're not entirely sure which Rousseau you're quoting. That's fine. Everyone's just trying to sound like they've read more than 2 pages of anything. Of course, some guests take things too far. They quote obscure Latin texts. They make footnote references. They mention owning multiple first editions, as though you can't just buy one and never touch it. But the true master of the library knows how to pivot. You nod thoughtfully, swirl your brandy, and say, "Yes, but what would Diderot say?" It doesn't matter who Diderot is, It's the tone that counts. Occasionally, a guest will wander too close to the forbidden shelf, a section filled with slightly embarrassing novels, cookbooks disguised in political bindings, or that single steamy romance novel you insist was left behind by your cousin. If they ask, you tell them it's an early commentary on passion as rebellion, then change the subject. Reading in here is optional. What matters is the illusion of engagement with culture. You may skim a few pages while waiting for dinner, or pretend to annotate a chapter in your diary, which is really just full of quotes you copied from someone smarter. And that's fine. In 1900s Paris, no one reads to learn. They read to be seen thinking. And so, as you lean back, glass in hand, firelight dancing off your cheekbones, you reflect on the true purpose of the private library. It is not for study, nor for silence. It is for presence, for the performance of intellect, the appearance of depth, and the bragging rights of having a room where knowledge quietly pretends to live. And besides, that one shelf near the fireplace, it opens into a hidden liquor cabinet. Just in case the conversation gets too philosophical. There are so many staff you've lost track. Footmen, maids, cooks, gardeners, coachmen, dog walkers, and people who dust the people who dust. Your only real task in life is remembering not to accidentally tip the butler's assistant's assistant. In 1900s Paris, if you're filthy rich, the concept of doing it yourself is reserved for things like blinking and breathing, and even those feel negotiable. Your household runs like a finely tuned watch powered by other people's labor. And you're the decorative dial on the front, the face of the operation, the one who always looks polished but has no idea what gears are turning behind the scenes. The staff are omnipresent and invisible, like wallpaper, but with excellent posture. They move quietly, efficiently, and often in complete synchronization, as if trained at some secret butler academy deep in the Alps. You rarely see them arrive, and you certainly never see them leave. They appear when needed, vanish when not, and glide like ghosts powered by etiquette and espresso. First, there's the butler, the general in this well-dressed army. His voice never rises above a whisper, yet somehow you always hear him. He oversees every other servant with a raised eyebrow and the subtle menace of someone who once served royalty. You've never seen him run, yet everything is always done instantly. Need a wine pairing for a cheese you haven't even picked yet? Done. Wondering why your dog is wearing a different collar? He already handled it. Beneath him is a full hierarchy that would give the military pause. The under-butler, the valet, the footman who handles gloves, the assistant footman who handles the assistant valet's coffee. There's even a specific maid who ensures that every cushion in the house is fluffed to match your emotional temperature. On blue days, velvets. On defiant days, brocades. Cooks operate in their own kingdom, usually underground, like culinary moles producing four-course miracles. You've never set foot in the kitchen, and frankly wouldn't know which direction to go, but you're aware there's an entire brigade down there, including a saucier, a pâtissier, and someone who only exists to source eggs from chickens emotionally aligned with your horoscope. Then there are the cleaning staff. They're never seen, yet somehow no speck of dust dares exist in their domain. Carpets are swept before anyone walks on them. Chandeliers are polished weekly, using special cloths made from unicorn eyelashes, or at least that's what you tell guests. Even the furniture gets pampered more than most people, and someone has to repress your guest towels after every use. It's like Groundhog Day, but for linens. Your gardener tends to the grounds as if Versailles might call for a tour at any moment. The hedges are shaped, the fountains choreographed, and the roses bloom on cue. You may not know their names, Pierre. Pascal? Possibly just the gardener. But you know that if the lilies wilt, someone is getting a strongly worded letter written on your behalf. Let's not forget the carriage staff. Your coachman wears more gold trim than some generals. The horses are better fed than most Parisians. There's even a lad whose job is to warm the carriage seat before you sit, ensuring your delicate behind never meets a cold cushion. A modern luxury, if we're being honest. Animal care is its own department. Your lapdog has a handler. Your parrot has a tutor. Even the koi in the garden pond are monitored by someone with an advanced understanding of aquatic etiquette. It's entirely possible your pets are better socialized than your cousins. Yet, for all their omnipresence, the rule is clear. Servants must never be noticed. If you see someone working, something has gone wrong. They're meant to float in and out like polite spectres, leaving behind only freshly ironed shirts and perfectly timed tea trays. You might occasionally nod at one, just to remind yourself you're not hallucinating the entire operation. But make no mistake, without them, your gilded life would crumble faster than a poorly made soufflé. They are the unseen hands that make your luxury possible, the silent symphony behind your every perfectly timed entrance, every wrinkle-free outfit, every afternoon pastry that appears as if by divine intervention. So as you recline with a book you're not reading and sip tea you didn't brew, remember this: you're the star, yes, but the crew backstage, they're the ones who actually make the play happen. Just don't try learning their names. That would be gauche. Lunch is a marathon. Several courses, bottomless champagne, and enough oysters to make a marine biologist faint. By dessert, you're not sure if you've eaten or just attended an edible performance art piece. In 1900s Paris, lunch isn't a break in the day. It is the day. It's not a refueling stop. It's a highly choreographed, multi-hour celebration of gluttony, elegance, and silent one-upmanship. It's where reputations are made, alliances are hinted at, and your digestion is tested in ways that modern science would consider unethical. The meal begins not with food, but with anticipation. You arrive precisely 12 minutes late, on purpose. Early is rude. Too late is social arson. A liveried footman slides open the dining room doors, as if unveiling a priceless painting, and the scene is, well, utterly insane. The table is so long, it has time zones. Candles flicker, cutlery glistens. The centerpiece includes flowers, feathers, and possibly live birds. Someone's chair has its own monogrammed pillow. You are seated according to a mystical formula, known only to the host, involving lineage, income, recent gossip quotient, and astrological compatibility. One wrong placement could cause a diplomatic incident, or at least a tense silence during the fish course. The first item to arrive is champagne. Of course it is. There will be more of it. It never really leaves. It simply regenerates like an overly cheerful fountain. Beside your glass, a tiny dish of amuse-bouches appears, bite-sized architectural wonders that take 6 hours to make and 6 seconds to eat. You don't understand what they are. No one does. But you make approving noises because they're French and you're polite. And then the oysters. Not one or two, dozens, served on beds of crushed ice, drizzled with lemon, accompanied by tiny forks forged in some obscure region of Switzerland, where shellfish etiquette is taken very seriously. You glance around the table to see how many others are eating them. You must never be the first to start, or the last. And if you chew, you might as well leave. Conversation during lunch is encouraged, but only in between courses. During service, everyone pretends to be fascinated by the sauce. Once plates are cleared, the dialogue resumes. It's light, sophisticated, and full of coded insults. "Oh, you're serving duck again." Sounds like an observation. but lands like a cannonball. More courses arrive. Soup so delicate you could weep. Fish so fresh it might swim away if not watched. Meats glazed, truffled, and carved tableside by a man with the hands of a surgeon and the dead eyes of someone who's seen too many undercooked tornadoes. Everything is served with ceremony. You nod as if you recognize the regional origin of the asparagus. You don't. No one does. The bread basket is a trap. Don't fall for it. Filling up on carbs before the main event is a rookie mistake. Also, if you take the last piece of brioche without offering it around the table first, prepare to be gently shunned until Easter. Dessert isn't one thing. It's a parade. Petite fours, sugared fruits, cakes shaped like other cakes, and an architectural nightmare involving spun sugar, a tiny swan, and someone's artistic vendetta against gravity. Coffee follows, poured with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royal christenings. By now, you're slipping into a luxurious stupor. Champagne has blurred the edges of your vision. You've forgotten what the second course was. You're fairly sure the fourth course winked at you. Your corset, or waistcoat, feels tighter than it did before, but removing it would be frowned upon unless you've inherited at least 3 titles. And yet, despite the decadence, lunch isn't just about food. It's about performance. You are being watched. How you eat, what you say, how many times you laugh politely at the comped story about the goose that escaped into the salon. Every detail is a test. Fail, and you're just another nouveau riche amateur with foie gras on your cravat. Survive, and you earn something greater than a full stomach. You earn the right to be invited back, which is good, because tomorrow's lunch has 7 courses, and a rumoured appearance from a pastry chef who once made a cake shaped like Napoleon's horse. So yes, it's exhausting, but you didn't come here for nutrition. You came to be fabulous. And in 1900s Paris, lunch is where fabulousness is served, piping hot, slightly ridiculous, and with a bottomless glass of champagne. If you're young, your day is a blur of tutors with strange facial hair, language lessons, and being reminded that you will never, ever be as successful as your great-grandfather. Playtime is strictly regulated and involves more etiquette than actual fun. Being a child in a wealthy Parisian household in 1900 sounds charming until you realize you're less of a kid and more of a tiny aristocrat in training. Your nursery isn't decorated with toys. It's decorated with heavy drapes, stern portraits, and chairs no one's allowed to sit in. There are toys, yes, but they're mostly carved from expensive woods and designed to teach you discipline, dignity, and how to hold a teacup without looking like a peasant. Your day begins not with cartoons or cereal, but with being pried from your canopied bed by a nanny whose job title might as well be sleep destroyer. She is a woman of rigid posture, terrifying calm, and eyes that suggest she once fought in an emotional war and won. She dresses you in an outfit with 30 buttons and 0 comfort, brushes your hair until it sparks, and whispers encouraging phrases like, "Your cousin Henri already knows Latin." Breakfast is supervised. You're allowed soft-boiled eggs, toast cut into perfect triangles, and a brief, silent glance at your parents from the other end of the cavernous dining room. Then it's off to lessons, carried out in a schedule so intense it could give a modern college student a nosebleed. First, there's French literature, taught by a man who looks like he's been personally insulted by Victor Hugo. You will read aloud. You will be corrected. You will pretend to care about 17th century verse, while mentally wondering what dirt tastes like. Then it's time for arithmetic. Not math, never math. Always arithmetic. With a tutor who believes numbers build character. You're not sure what character is, but it seems to involve long division and tears. After that comes language instruction, because being rich means never having to speak only one language. German, English, Italian, and occasionally Latin are all on the docket. Your pronunciation is monitored with the precision of a military exercise, and any attempt to ask, "Why do I need to know this?" is met with a tight smile and a reminder that you're not being raised to ask things. You're being raised to host things. You take lunch in the nursery, a subdued affair with your siblings, a governess, and food that tastes like boiled formality. If you make a joke, it must be grammatically correct. If you spill something, it's a lesson in grace. If you slouch, your chair is replaced with a smaller, meaner one that somehow has corners on every side. Afternoons are for refinement. Music lessons, drawing, calligraphy, and dancing, because heaven forbid you grow up unable to waltz without stepping on someone's title. The music instructor is only slightly less frightening than your nanny and insists that every child should play the piano as though the emperor is listening, which is ironic, considering you're not allowed to play anything joyful. Playtime does exist, technically, but it's a very structured form of recreation. You may go outside, weather permitting of course, for a supervised walk in the garden. You may not run, you may not climb trees. You may collect leaves if you do so quietly and with purpose. Games like tag are considered common, and laughter is permitted only if it's delicate and non-disruptive. You don't play with other children so much as near them, practicing your eye contact and polite nods. And throughout all of this, you're constantly reminded by relatives, staff, and the occasional stranger that you are the heir to a legacy. Your great-grandfather fought in wars, built railroads, bankrolled entire governments. You just spilled ink on your Latin homework. Bedtime is not a cozy affair. It's an organized retreat into darkness. You are read to from moral instruction books, stories about brave children who died young and uncomplaining, and tucked in under blankets so tightly folded, you briefly consider escaping through the fireplace. So yes, you're a rich child in 1900s Paris. You're dressed like a diplomat, schooled like a monk, and emotionally coached like a future head of state. And if you're very lucky, someday you'll grow up and get your own terrifying tutor to inflict upon your children. Transportation is less about getting somewhere and more about being seen getting there. Your options: gleaming carriages or, if you're extremely on trend, a terrifyingly loud and unreliable automobile. Either way, the point is to look unimpressed. In 1900s Paris, you don't commute, you arrive. Preferably fashionably late, with an air of breezy indifference and a plume of horse scent or engine smoke trailing behind you. Getting from point A to point B isn't about efficiency, it's about prestige. If you're not causing a minor street spectacle every time you leave the house, are you even trying? Let's begin with the classic, the horse-drawn carriage. Sleek, polished, and attended by a coachman so immaculately dressed, he might outrank you in some monarchies. The horses are hand-picked, perfectly groomed, and trained not to flinch at anything short of cannon fire. Your carriage itself is a rolling monument to wealth. Wood so varnished you can check your reflection in it, and upholstery so plush it makes your actual furniture jealous. But of course, even here there's a hierarchy. The number of horses matters. 2 is respectable. 4 is a flex. 6 is either a wedding or an ego the size of Versailles. The type of carriage also sends a message. A broom says, "I'm elegant but modest." A barouche says, "I'm here to flirt." A landau with gold trim says, "I own 17 vineyards, and I've never poured my own tea." Every detail of your transport is curated. Footmen perch on the back, purely for show. There's a small lantern so people can admire your profile at dusk. And don't forget the monogram on the door. It must be large enough to recognize, but not so large that it screams deep insecurity. It's a delicate balance. Of course, if you're a bit of a thrill seeker or a status chaser with a death wish, you might opt for one of the newfangled automobiles. Early adopters of the horseless carriage are known for two things: boldness and a complete disregard for hearing preservation. These machines are loud, temperamental, and occasionally explode. But my goodness, are they fashionable? You don't drive it yourself, of course. That would be undignified and probably illegal. No, you have a chauffeur, specially trained to coax the sputtering beast into motion while wearing goggles and a long coat that makes him look like he's late for a dirigible duel. You sit in the back, wrapped in furs, trying to look bored while secretly wondering if you'll survive the trip. Paris traffic is a glorious mess. Horse-drawn carriages compete with motorcars, bicycles, trams, and the occasional escaped chicken. The cobbled streets rattle everything. Horns honk, hooves clatter, and drivers shout things like "imbecile" and "you dented my Duke." If you manage to make it through the Place de l'Opéra without witnessing a duel of insults between two aristocrats over a fender bender, it's probably a national holiday. There's no such thing as a quiet arrival. Even pulling up to someone's estate involves enough drama to warrant a 5-piece orchestra. A footman hops down, opens the door with a flourish, and presents your gloved hand as though it's a national treasure. By the time you step onto the pavement, everyone within 100 feet knows you've arrived. Which is, of course, the entire point. Some elite families even go as far as customizing their carriages or cars with signature colors. Heaven forbid you be mistaken for the wrong kind of rich person. Imagine being confused with someone who made their money in trade. The horror. Still, there are drawbacks. Horses need to eat, rest, and occasionally express their opinions in the middle of the road. Automobiles need constant maintenance and sometimes burst into flames near flower stalls. And both require your staff to plan your journey like a small military campaign, accounting for weather, cobblestone gradients, and the possibility of running into your ex on the Rue de Rivoli. But ultimately, whether you're gliding through Paris behind a team of white stallions or rattling across cobbles in a roaring metal box, the goal remains the same: to turn heads, inspire gossip, and act like it's all beneath you. Because in the Belle Époque, transportation isn't about speed, it's about spectacle. And, ideally, you arrive looking like you didn't move a muscle. Just floated in on a cloud of money and mild disdain. Leisure is a full-time job. Stroll through private gardens, attend to your hothouse orchids, or just sit by a fountain and try to look pensive while secretly calculating how long until dinner. In 1900s Paris, once you've survived the horrors of breakfast, the chaos of social calls, and the digestive warfare of lunch, you enter the hazy stretch of time known as afternoon leisure. But don't be fooled, this is not leisure as peasants know it. There is no napping, no elastic waistbands, no binge-watching absinthe-induced hallucinations. No. Leisure for the filthy rich is structured, curated, and meticulously monitored for style and posture. Your options are many, yet somehow all eerily similar. The most common choice? A slow promenade through your estate's private garden. It is immaculately trimmed, absurdly symmetrical, and populated with flora so delicate they make Victorian poetry seem rugged. The hedges are shaped into animals, mythological creatures, and, just for fun, portraits of your ancestors. Some are flattering. Some were done during a family feud. You glide along pebbled paths in your third outfit of the day. Something light, floaty, and just constricting enough to maintain good posture without preventing blood flow. You may carry a parasol, not to block the sun, but to signal that you understand the concept of complexion management. Freckles, after all, are the first sign of peasant behavior. As you walk, you occasionally pause near fountains. These are not simple water features. These are engineering marvels that burble dramatically behind you, while you stare into the distance as if contemplating the fate of empires. In truth, you're mentally calculating how many more minutes you need to stay outside before it's socially acceptable to retreat indoors and pretend to read Rousseau. If you're feeling particularly ambitious, you might tend to your orchids. Or rather, observe someone tending to your orchids while you nod knowingly. The orchid house is a sweltering glass dome that smells like damp silk and botanical arrogance. You'll make approving noises as your head gardener explains something about soil pH, while secretly wondering if anyone would notice if you wandered off to nap in the hammock behind the conservatory. Other relaxing options include sketching in your leather-bound drawing journal, even if your artistic skills peaked at age 6, composing overwrought letters to people you just saw that morning, or attempting to read philosophical works while falling asleep upright on a chaise lounge. If you snore gently and your book falls open on Montaigne, that's called intellectual repose. You may receive visitors during this time. Not friends, never friends. Fellow leisure professionals. They arrive with their own parasols, their own tiny lapdogs, and a burning desire to compare garden statues. Conversations revolve around which sculptor is most au courant, who has the best marble, and whether cherubs are still in or hopelessly passé. Sometimes your leisure is interrupted by scheduled performances, string quartets in the gazebo, poetry recitals by dramatically tortured aristocrats, or an opera singer who's been paid to not sing too loudly. You sit politely, sipping chilled lemonade that tastes mostly of boredom, and clap just enough to show you're still conscious. And yet, despite the elegant boredom, there's a strange pressure to enjoy it all deeply. You must radiate contentment. Your sighs must be wistful. Your yawns must be disguised as quiet admiration of the sunset. Because if you're not enjoying your privilege, are you even really elite? Eventually, as the shadows grow long and the scent of dinner preparations begins to drift from the kitchen, you know your time of daylight leisure is nearly done. You adjust your parasol, rise slowly from your carved bench, and make your way back toward the house, with the melancholy grace of someone who hasn't lifted anything heavier than a teacup all day. You've survived another afternoon of carefully curated nothingness. You've walked the walk, smelled the flowers, and stared blankly at a pond for a solid 30 minutes. You've done absolutely nothing, and you've done it spectacularly well. And now, with dignity intact and your shoes entirely unscuffed, it's time to change, for the 4th time today, and prepare to do what the rich do best after a long day of leisure: sit through another 5-hour dinner and pretend it's not exhausting. Every year, it's time for the family portrait. It's not about capturing love, it's about documenting wealth in oil paint. The children are bribed with sweets, the adults with champagne, and the dog just tries not to pee on the carpet. This isn't your average snapshot. There's no say cheese, no candid giggles, no matching sweaters in front of a fireplace. This is high-stakes legacy building. This is the moment you etch your family name into the annals of Parisian opulence. For generations to come, your great-grandchildren will gaze at this painting and say, "Ah, yes, the year Grandpapa's moustache was shaped like a tilde." Preparation begins days in advance. The sitting room is cleared and redecorated, because even the background must scream wealth. A painter is summoned, one with impeccable credentials and just enough nearsightedness to be flattering. Bonus points if he has a beard, wears a smock, and uses the phrase "capture the essence" at least 3 times before lunch. Wardrobes are selected with the seriousness of a military campaign. no clashing tones, no patterns that suggest personality. The goal is coordinated luxury. You'll be draped in silks, velvets, brocade, anything that makes it clear you don't do manual labor and have very strong opinions about cufflinks. Children are stuffed into miniature replicas of adult clothing, which, as you might guess, makes them angry and extremely crinkly. The scene itself must look effortless, which is why it takes 5 hours and 7 emotional breakdowns to achieve. The father sits in the center, one leg forward, expression somewhere between noble thought and mild indigestion. The mother stands slightly behind, one hand on his shoulder and the other gripping a fan, child, or glass of wine, depending on mood. Children are placed according to likability and twitchiness. The least fidgety child is awarded a prime lap spot. The more feral ones are strategically hidden behind furniture, floral arrangements, or conveniently placed urns. If there's a teenager, they're posed near a bookshelf to suggest intelligence, or at least literacy. Then comes the dog, always present, always slightly panicked. It may be dressed, it may be leashed, it may be sedated, but it will be included because a dog in a portrait says, "We are refined but approachable. We are intimidating, but we still pet things." The painter begins, muttering to himself and occasionally squinting as though you're all slightly wrong. You hold your pose, your spine rebels, your smile fades. Your child begins to sniff dramatically, as if on the brink of plague. No one moves, because if you break formation, you'll have to do it again. During breaks, the adults down sherry like it's a sport. The children are bribed with treats that are both sticky and crumbly, perfect for satin. A small servant is assigned solely to dab faces with linen cloths and whisper encouragement like, "Almost done, madame," even when it's clearly a lie. As the sitting wears on, everyone ages in real time. Eyes droop, postures sag. A cousin you forgot existed shows up, demanding to be included and bringing her turtle. The turtle is placed on a side table as a metaphor, and no one has the strength to argue. When it's finally over, the painter packs up his brushes and makes vague promises about delivering a draft in a fortnight. You collapse into a chair, legs asleep, face stuck in a half-smile of permanent tension. The dog is chewing a cravat. One child is crying silently. Another has eaten a pearl. Weeks later, the finished portrait arrives. It's glorious. You look 10 years younger. The children appear angelic. The dog is regal and, somehow, 3 times its actual size. It's not accurate. It's aspirational. The painting is framed in gold and mounted in the main hall, where it silently judges visitors for the next 200 years. Guests will gaze at it and murmur things like, "Such presence," while you smile modestly and pretend the entire ordeal didn't cause 3 family feuds and a herniated disc. Because in 1900s Paris, the family portrait isn't about truth, it's about legacy. And if you happen to look slightly airbrushed in oil, well, history loves a beautiful lie. Around 4, it's time to pretend you're not hungry before dinner. Enter the absinthe ritual, equal parts drink and performance. Pair with tiny pastries and a second round of character assassination about the neighbors. This sacred, semi-hallucinogenic interlude is known as l'heure verte, the green hour. It is not to be confused with tea time, which is for the British and involves too much elbow stiffness. No, this is the French elite's version of a palate cleanser for the soul. A soft descent into the early evening, buffered by liquor that smells faintly of regret, and pastries that collapse if you exhale near them. The ritual begins with the careful presentation of the absinthe itself. It arrives in a bottle shaped like a minor religious artifact, green, glowing faintly, and probably capable of erasing the last 20 minutes of your memory. A special glass is produced, pre-measured with a curved bottom and an air of superiority. Then comes the absinthe spoon, a tiny slotted silver instrument that exists for no reason except to whisper, "I'm better than you." Onto the spoon, a sugar cube. Over the sugar cube, the cold water drips, slowly, precisely, like a guilty secret. As the water mixes with the absinthe, the drink turns cloudy, milky, almost ghost-like. This transformation is referred to as the louche, and everyone in the room pretends they haven't seen it 100 times before. You're meant to observe it reverently, as if you're watching a Monet dissolve into scandal. You take a sip. It tastes like licorice and impending drama. Your tongue tingles. Your vision sharpens. You remember a poem you wrote in 1894 about rain and betrayal. You didn't even write poetry. But absinthe doesn't care. It unlocks memories that aren't even yours. And just when your brain starts to detach from its hinges, in come the pastries. They arrive on a silver tray so delicate it might shatter if someone sneezes. These are not snacks. These are architectural achievements. Eclairs, millefeuille, macarons, each one crafted by a paver, chef who probably whispers to the dough for moral encouragement. You're allowed no more than 3. Any more. And it implies either desperation or pregnancy, neither of which are ideal in a drawing room setting. You take tiny, dainty bites, as though you're kissing each dessert goodbye. Crumbs are not allowed. If one falls, a maid materializes from the wallpaper and spirits it away before anyone can notice your humanity. As the sugar hits and the absinthe settles in, the conversation resumes, softly, wickedly, and always off the record. The neighbors are still doing something inappropriate. The Duchesse de Beaufort was seen with a man whose shoes didn't match. The Comte's daughter may or may not have eloped with her fencing instructor, or possibly just borrowed his hat. Either way, reputations must be discussed. This is also the hour when letters are read aloud. Anonymous invitations, cryptic poetry, and passive-aggressive correspondence from distant cousins. If it's printed on embossed cardstock, it gets analyzed like a government dossier. What does she mean by regretfully declining? Is she sick? Is she offended? Is she alive? Some brave soul attempts a performance, a poem, a monologue, a haunting song about longing and cheese. Applause is delicate. Anything too enthusiastic, and you look provincial. Anything too faint, and you look jealous. It's a fine line. Eventually, the shadows stretch longer. The pastries vanish, and someone's lapdog falls asleep on your shoe. The mood becomes hazy, soft, a little too honest. That's how you know it's time to retreat. Absinthe does not ask you to leave. It simply releases you from its emerald grip and sends you wobbling gently toward the next costume change of the day. You won't remember much about this hour tomorrow, just the sweetness, the laughter, and the vague impression that you may have accidentally promised to sponsor someone's art exhibition or duel. Hard to say. But one thing's certain, in 1900s Paris, the afternoon snack isn't about hunger. It's about indulgence, illusion, and maintaining just the right amount of intoxicated elegance before dinner, and the second wave of preposterous theatre that is life among the elite. Affairs aren't just tolerated, they're practically scheduled. Everyone has a close friend with suspiciously perfect hair. The trick is to have your scandal before dessert, and never, ever get caught by someone with a sketchbook. In the glittering haze of Belle Epoque Paris, fidelity is more of a loose suggestion than a marital expectation. Love, you see, is far too important to be confined to just one person, especially when your spouse is off playing piano in the salon while you're busy making prolonged eye contact with someone whose handshake lingers a little too long. The entire upper-crust social calendar practically encourages these dalliances. Private concerts, masquerade balls, charity luncheons, These are just likely perfumed opportunities for gloved hand-brushing and coded whispers behind fans. Every outing is a potential prelude to a rendezvous, and every well-placed compliment is a potential threat to domestic harmony. Affairs are conducted with the subtlety of a French mime in a hurricane. Everyone knows, the staff, the in-laws, the neighbors. But as long as it's not spoken aloud, it doesn't count. Denial is the real shared currency of the elite. They're just close friends. They both enjoy reading. They were simply rehearsing a play that required holding hands in the greenhouse. There are rules, of course. Scandal has a dress code. One must never fall in love with someone too poor. Passion is fine, but it must be aesthetic. Letters are allowed, but they must be sealed with wax, sprayed with perfume, and contain at least one poem or cryptic metaphor about swans. And if you're going to meet in secret, always make sure there's an escape route and that your shoes match. For many, the thrill isn't even about the romance, it's the performance. The long, loaded glances across candle-lit tables. The shared laugh at an opera joke no one else understands. The subtle exchange of gloves that somehow becomes the hottest scandal in the arrondissement. You haven't truly arrived until someone accuses you of impropriety during a garden party. Of course, not everyone keeps it discreet. Some prefer their affairs flamboyant, like the Baroness who once accidentally sent her lover's handkerchief to her husband's tailor, or the playwright who wrote an entire tragedy just to confess his feelings to the Comtesse in verse. He rhymed her name with regret. Bold choice. But the real danger isn't discovery, it's being boring. If your affair doesn't come with at least one whispered rumor, a dramatic exit from a salon, or a cryptic note hidden in a glove compartment, then why even bother? Half the fun is being discussed while pretending not to notice. Yet with all this flirtation, there are lines not to be crossed. Falling too hard is gauche. Divorce is still taboo. And public humiliation, social suicide. That's why many affairs end as quietly as they begin, with a vague apology, a gift of rare orchids, and an agreement to never speak of that summer at the coast again. And pity the poor artist who stumbles into the middle of it all, literally. Portraitists, poets, and pianists often become unintentional third wheels in these elegant, emotional triangles. One moment you're hired to paint a lady's parrot, and the next you're listening to her weep into a lace-trimmed handkerchief about how the Duke no longer sends her pastries. But when done properly, an affair is less of a betrayal and more of a hobby. A polite rebellion against boredom, a decorative crack in the facade of perfection. After all, when your entire life is structured, dressed, and curated, sometimes the only freedom left is falling in love with someone you're not supposed to. And so, as evening falls and the candles are lit, you raise a glass to the art of the illicit, to flirtation conducted with flair, to secrets kept in the folds of silk, and to the unspoken understanding that in 1900s Paris, the heart may wander, so long as it does so tastefully and never while someone is sketching. The streets of Paris are your personal runway. Every errand is an opportunity for a shopping spree, and running out for milk somehow ends with a new hat, a diamond bracelet, and mild existential dread. In Belle Époque Paris, shopping isn't a necessity. It's a blood sport. A public display of taste, power, and just the right amount of financial irresponsibility. You don't go shopping because you need something. You go shopping because someone else might see you shopping. And that, dear listener, is the real prize. You begin your spree on the Boulevard Haussmann, where department stores rise like gilded temples to consumer excess. The most legendary? Le Bon Marché, part shop, part theatre, all temptation. Its ceilings are high, its halls endless. and its employees trained to make you feel like a minor royal whose only job is to point at things and say, "Wrap it." You're not alone, of course. You're accompanied by an entourage, a lady's maid to carry your purchases, a footman to glare at anyone who dares bump into you, and possibly a small dog in a satin sling who judges everything with narrowed eyes. Your carriage waits outside, wheels still warm from your last 7 errands, which may or may not have included accidentally buying another piano. Inside, the displays are exquisite. Racks of hand-stitched gowns arranged by mood. Gloves so soft they might be made of dreams. Parasols in colours so delicate they make pastels weep. You try on hats like you're choosing your next personality. Feathered, flirtatious, beaded, mysterious, veiled, dangerously wealthy, and definitely hiding something. Naturally, you head to the perfume counter. You already own 17 signature scents, but there's always room for one more that captures the essence of dusk, or smells like betrayal, but in a good way. The sales assistant spritzes a sample onto a satin ribbon and waves it gently, as though summoning a spirit. You inhale and declare it satisfactory, which is code for "I'll take 3. Jewelry, of course, is a non-negotiable stop. Not because you need more, heavens no, but because she might be there. You know the one. The Comtesse who insists on simple elegance while casually dripping in sapphires the size of pigeons. You hover near the diamond cases, pretending to be indifferent while loudly muttering, "Oh, this emerald reminds me of the tiara we lost in Vienna." And let's not forget the boutiques, those smaller, exclusive dens of extravagance tucked into winding side streets. These are where you find the really unhinged items. Monogrammed opera binoculars, velvet slippers for your cat, or a mechanical fan that plays Debussy when you open it. You buy them not for function, but for the delicious satisfaction of someone asking, "Where on earth did you find that?" Occasionally, you remember your original errand. You do, in fact, need milk. But by this point, you've accumulated 3 hat boxes, a parasol, 2 scarves you'll never wear, and an enameled snuff box shaped like a frog. You send the footman for the milk and consider your job done. But even with arms full of luxury, your work isn't over. The true climax of a shopping spree? Being seen returning. As your carriage pulls up to your grand home, you pause at the curb, tilt your chin just so, and let the boxes cascade from the door like a confetti cannon of opulence. A neighbor peers from behind lace curtains. You smile. Victory. Later, you'll spread your purchases across the divan and question nothing, except maybe why you bought another silk dressing gown when you already own 5. But it's not about need. It's about curation. You are a walking museum of impulse and elegance, and your collection must never stagnate. Because in 1900s Paris, shopping isn't therapy, it's a competitive sport, a pastime, a statement. And if it occasionally fills the void left by affection, purpose, or spiritual fulfillment, at least it does so in velvet. You're expected to have opinions about art, but not so strong that you actually buy anything yourself. Salons are the social battlefield. Who can appear most bored while discussing the meaning of life in 12 syllables or less? Salons in 1900s. Paris aren't salons in the modern sense. No hair is getting done. No facials are being applied. These are gatherings, ritualized, dramatized, and sometimes weaponized, hosted in the candlelit drawing rooms of the fashionable elite. The goal? To outwit, outquote, and outposture everyone else in the room without ever breaking a sweat under your feathered hat. You arrive fashionably late, naturally. Too early, and you look up desperate for stimulation. Too late, and you miss the first poetic jewel, which, let's be honest, is usually the best part. Your outfit is less about taste and more about symbolism. The hat, Enormous. A plumage hurricane. You could smuggle an entire pigeon inside it and no one would question you. In fact, they'd call it bold. The hostess greets you with a kiss on each cheek, and the kind of smile that says, "I know what you said about me last week, and I'm choosing not to destroy you." Yet, you are ushered into a room filled with velvet chairs, flickering gas lamps, and conversations so thick with subtext you could spread them on toast. Someone is reading aloud. Always. A poem, a political treatise, an excerpt from a novel that hasn't been published but absolutely must be heard. The reader wears a monocle they don't need and speaks in a voice that suggests they were born in a library. You nod solemnly at the right intervals, even though you stopped listening after line 3 and are now silently judging their posture. There are painters. So many painters. Some are brooding in corners. Others are desperately trying to look like they're not trying at all. They speak in riddles, refer to colours using words like regretful or explosive, and chain smoke with the urgency of people who suspect their muse is hiding in the ashtray. Then come the debates. Oh, the debates. Politics, philosophy, ethics, romance, no subject is off limits, but all must be approached with poetic vagueness. Is democracy the illusion of choice, or the choice of illusion? Someone asks. And everyone hums approvingly, even though no one knows what was just said. You chime in with a quote from Voltaire that may or may not be accurate. Doesn't matter. It's the delivery that counts. If you're lucky, there's an argument. A proper one. A painter storms out. A duchess swoons. Someone dramatically removes their gloves. It's all delightfully theatrical and completely pointless, which is exactly what makes it wonderful. Drinks are served, absinthe, of course, along with suspiciously herbal cordials, and things poured from crystal decanters with labels like Madeira and possibly poison. The hors d'oeuvres are tiny, incomprehensible, and taste mostly of texture and social pressure. You eat one, nod approvingly, and try not to make a face. Every salon has a centerpiece, a guest of honor. Tonight, it's a composer whose latest symphony was banned from performance for being too erotic for strings. He wears velvet gloves, won't touch doorknobs, and claims to communicate only in harmonics. Naturally, he is the most popular man in the room, and while the art and intellectualism are ostensibly the focus, let's be honest, this is a gossip pit dressed as a philosophy club. Behind every quote is a grudge. Behind every applause, a rivalry. You say someone's work is intriguing, but you mean a chaotic mess held together by sheer nerve and desperation. They say your critique is insightful, but they mean your hat is stupid. And I saw your husband with the opera singer last Thursday. As the night winds down, the conversations melt into murmurs. Someone plays a tragic song on the piano. Someone else recites a poem about longing and brandy. You, exhausted from pretending to know the difference between impressionism and symbolism, make your exit with a perfectly timed yawn and a remark about how discourse has declined since Rousseau, because in the glittering salons of Paris, you don't need to be right. You just need to be eloquently indifferent, and if your opinion comes with a quip, a hat, and a glass of something strong, well, congratulations. You've just survived another evening of high society's most absurd and intoxicating sport. The highlight of the week is the opera, where the richest outrich each other with fashion, jewelry, and accidentally dropping hints about their latest yacht purchase. The actual opera? Background noise. To the untrained eye, opera night might seem like an evening of culture and refinement. But to those in the know, it's a full-contact social event disguised as music appreciation. Sure, there's a soprano hitting high notes that could shatter glass and a baritone brooding so hard he may never recover, but no one's really here for Puccini. You're here to be seen, scrutinized, judged, and ideally envied. Preparation for opera night begins around midday and consumes roughly the same amount of time as launching a royal wedding. Choosing an outfit is a strategic endeavor. You want to look like you spent a fortune, but not that you tried. The ideal aesthetic is, oh, this? I just grabbed it off the chaise while deciding which emeralds to wear. Ladies wrap themselves in silk, tulle, and whispers of scandal. Corsets are pulled tighter than family budgets. Necklines plunge like stock markets. Gloves are elbow length and custom dyed to match either your dress or your general mood. Gentlemen, meanwhile, go full penguin. Tails, cravats, pocket watches, and shoes so shiny they serve as backup mirrors in case of gossip emergencies. Jewelry is a weapon. The more it sparkles, the more it says, "My husband doesn't love me, but he does finance me." Tiara? Acceptable, even if you're not royal. Just pretend it's vintage. Brooch the size of a fist? A bit gauche, but fine if you inherited it. Earrings so heavy they alter your posture? Mandatory. Your carriage arrives in a queue of other carriages, each trying to outglide the one before it. Footmen leap from steps like acrobats, opening doors with the flair of magicians pulling rabbits from hats. You exit slowly, dramatically, as if the opera might be cancelled if you're not photographed under gaslight within the next 3 seconds. The opera house itself, usually the Palais Garnier, which looks like a cake built by hallucinating architects, is ablaze with chandeliers, gilded arches, and the scent of powder, perfume, and silent rivalry. You make your way to your private box, because sitting among the general population is obviously unthinkable. These boxes aren't just seats. They're real estate. Social thrones with velvet cushions and excellent lines of sight. Not to the stage, but to the other boxes. You scan the crowd with practiced nonchalance. Who's wearing last season's embroidery? Who arrived without their spouse? Who brought a suspiciously attractive cousin from Milan? The opera may be tragic, but the real drama is unfolding behind lorgnettes and under feathered fans. The performance begins. The house dims. The curtain rises. And you promptly begin ignoring it. This is not rudeness. This is tradition. The opera provides just enough noise to disguise whispers, just enough lighting to make diamonds twinkle, and just enough length for you to strategically rotate your body toward the most important social axis in the room. Between acts, there's mingling. Hallways flood with couture, cologne, and subtle warfare. You compliment someone's dress while internally noting that it's definitely last year's silhouette. Someone tells you they adore your earrings while calculating their resale value. You exchange smiles, air kisses, and the kind of veiled insults that would leave lesser beings weeping in the stairwell. Refreshments are served. Champagne, of course. Tiny pastries that cost more than your maid's monthly wage. You don't eat, perish the thought. But you do hold a macaron, occasionally gesturing with it to punctuate a joke about the marquis who accidentally invested in soap. As the final aria soars into the rafters and the heroine dies gloriously in a puff of melodrama, no one blinks. The real climax happened 2 acts ago when someone tripped on their gown and landed in a duke's lap. You applaud gracefully. Not for the performance, for surviving the performance. You've made appearances, dropped hints about your new villa, survived 3 veiled insults, and maybe started a rumor about a duchess's poodle. Opera night isn't about music. It's about spectacle, about power stitched into seams, pride clasped around necks, and elegance sharpened into weapons. And if someone dares ask which composer was on stage tonight, you simply smile and say, "Oh, darling, I only came for the overture." Dinner is less a meal, more a marathon. There's a fork for every occasion, a wine for every emotion, and an unspoken contest to see who can gossip without moving their lips. To dine among the filthy rich in 1900s Paris is to enter a gilded colosseum of manners, mischief, and mild indigestion. These aren't meals, they're theatrical productions performed over white linen battlegrounds. The dinner party is where reputations are made, alliances are forged, and someone's cousin inevitably cries into their consommé. You don't just show up for dinner, you make an entrance, preferably 15 minutes late, wearing something that whispers I may have accidentally overthrown a small monarchy before dessert. Your hostess greets you with a practiced air of delight, kissing each cheek like she didn't just insult your shoes to the person sitting at her right. You compliment the drapes. They're new, they're hideous. You move on. The dining room is a glimmering cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers sway like nervous debutantes. The table stretches to the vanishing point, layered with gold-rimmed plates, flower arrangements that block half the room, and cutlery that outnumbers your childhood friends. Each place setting includes approximately 4 forks, 3 knives, 2 spoons, a tiny rake, possibly for salad, and something that may be either a butter spreader or a social test. Seating is strategic. You're placed between someone you once politely tried to duel and someone else who writes passive-aggressive essays in the newspaper. Across from you is your latest crush. Diagonally, your ex. Everyone smiles. Everyone lies. The first course arrives. A delicate soup served in a cup too small for confidence. You sip quietly while pretending not to hear the whispered rumor about the Baron's 3rd missing canary. The second course is fish, possibly trout, possibly something with more syllables than flavor. You wield the fish fork like a fencing foil, only stabbing your dignity once or twice. By the third course, the wine has begun flowing in earnest. Every wine has a backstory. Ah yes, this vintage comes from a vineyard so exclusive that the grapes are serenaded nightly by monks. You nod, pretend to taste the oak, and try not to wonder if the monks are unionized. Conversation swells. Topics include opera, scandal, politics, and who wore what where. You must sound intelligent but never passionate, charming but not too eager, funny but in a way that suggests deep inner sadness. Laughter is currency, and you spend it cautiously. Your anecdote about accidentally attending a séance is a hit. Someone else follows, with a story about getting lost in their own hedge maze. You pretend that's relatable. By the fourth course, which involves something unpronounceable and jellied, you realize you've lost all feeling in your corset. You can no longer tell if you're full, hungry, or just emotionally overwhelmed by the presence of 5 different types of pâté. Meanwhile, the gossip intensifies. Someone's aunt eloped with a violinist. Someone else's maid was spotted wearing her mistress's necklace to the market. You blink slowly, chew thoughtfully, and keep a mental tally of who's ruining whom. Dessert arrives in waves. There's a flaming pastry, a sculpture made entirely of spun sugar and regret, a pudding that jiggles ominously. You eat with the kind of caution usually reserved for pufferfish. Then comes the digestive, a polite excuse to keep drinking. Glasses clink. Coughs are stifled. Someone misquotes Rousseau and is instantly corrected by 3 people who are definitely lying. You exchange final glances, final laughs, and final veiled insults before the evening begins to wind down like a slightly intoxicated ballet. As you leave, you compliment your hostess on the meal, her dress, and her completely accidental seating chart that just so happened to place your arch-rival within butterknife range. She thanks you graciously and makes a note never to invite you back without a chaperone, because in Belle Époque Paris, a dinner party isn't just a social gathering, it's a battlefield dressed in lace and foie gras. And the only real etiquette rule? Never, ever let your fork slip while someone's revealing their third divorce. After dinner, gentlemen retire to a cloud of cigar smoke and pretend to debate politics. The real competition, who can stay awake the longest without drooling into the cognac. This sacred ritual, the after-dinner retreat, is less about discussion and more about the art of slow social decay. The ladies drift off toward tea, lacework, and hushed gossip behind fans. The men, meanwhile, file solemnly into a drawing room drenched in mahogany, leather, and the unmistakable scent of inherited wealth. The air is thick before the cigars are even lit. You settle into a leather armchair that cost more than your cousin's education and was designed to look impressive while quietly destroying your lower back. A valet appears, not your valet, just a valet. There are dozens, offering a polished humidor that contains enough Cuban cigars to start a civil war. You select one not based on taste, but on length. The longer it is, the longer you can pretend you're doing something productive. The cigars are clipped, lit, and puffed in rhythmic unison, like some kind of aristocratic incantation. You inhale deeply and promptly regret it. It tastes like burning paper and repressed feelings, but you nod appreciatively because coughing would shatter the illusion of experience. Cognac is served in enormous snifters because the point isn't to drink it, it's to swirl it thoughtfully while murmuring things like fascinating and indeed even when no one is talking. The cognac smells like varnish, velvet, and something vaguely biblical. You take a sip, let it set your throat on fire, and pretend this is pleasant. The conversation begins in earnest. Topics include politics, but only hypothetically, the stock market, but only in metaphors, and war, but only wars you weren't personally inconvenienced by. One man opens with a quote from Voltaire. Another counters with a personal friend in the Senate. You nod wisely and add nothing. It's a performance, like opera, but slower, with more pipe tobacco and fewer sopranos screaming in Italian. You begin to feel your body dissolve into the chair. Your legs have stopped transmitting messages. Your eyelids weigh more than your monocle collection. The man beside you is explaining, in excruciating detail, his theory on agricultural reform. He has never touched a potato in his life. You wonder if anyone would notice if you slipped under the carpet. Someone tries to liven things up with a witty anecdote involving a bishop, a horse, and a misunderstanding about fencing etiquette. It takes 20 minutes, 4 interruptions, and still no one laughs. One man chuckles out of politeness and promptly spills cognac on his cravat. A footman appears silently, wipes it away, and vanishes again into the woodwork like a highly trained moth. Meanwhile, across the room, an argument has broken out over who owns the finest stallion in the department. This quickly escalates into talk of bloodlines, honor, and whose father had the better mustache. You take this opportunity to check the time. It's been 17 minutes since you entered the room. Feels like 17 years. The fireplace crackles. A clock ticks with unbearable clarity. No one dares mention it. But at least one gentleman is now fully asleep with his eyes open. A skill honed over years of diplomatic dinners and deeply uninspiring sermons. You envy him. Eventually, the air becomes unbreathable. Not metaphorically, literally. The cigars have rendered the atmosphere into a visible soup. You cough quietly, blame it on the old wood paneling, and pretend to be deeply moved by someone's theory on tariffs. After what feels like a full geological epoch, the hostess peeks her head in and gently announces that tea is ready. The men leap up, some with more creaking than others, and declare the conversation invigorating, even though none of them can remember what was actually said. You rejoin the ladies, your jacket now steeped in smoke and regret. and prepare for the final act of the evening. Digestives, more gossip, and pretending you don't need help finding your bedroom. Because in 1900s Paris, the after-dinner retreat isn't about enlightenment. It's about endurance. A gentleman's rite of passage, a smoky, sleepy theatre of tradition where you age 10 years, say nothing of value, and somehow still feel superior for having survived it. As night falls, you're swaddled in silk pajamas and escorted to a bed the size of Luxembourg. Sleep is elusive. After all, what if you miss a midnight scandal? Don't worry. Your dreams are staffed by professionals too. You'd think, after a day packed with political debates disguised as gossip, 4 outfit changes, and enough champagne to float a small boat, you'd collapse into unconsciousness like a sensible person. But no, sleep in the world of the filthy rich is not a necessity. It's a curated experience. The bedtime process begins not with brushing your teeth, but with dismissing your staff one by one like royalty stepping off stage. First, the valet removes your evening shoes, which you haven't technically walked in. They were merely worn, observed, and quietly judged. Then the lady's maid, or gentleman's gentleman, depending on your gender and flair, unbuttons you out of your dinner attire with the precision of a bomb technician. You are gently lifted out of your social armor and lowered into something infinitely more decadent. Pajamas woven from silk so fine it's rumored the silkworms were serenaded during production. Slippers are placed just so. A warm cloth, scented with rosewater, is dabbed on your temples, because apparently that's supposed to soothe the mind. You are then offered a tiny glass of something, maybe warm milk, maybe a liqueur that smells like furniture polish but costs as much as a racehorse. You sip it anyway. It's tradition. The room is quiet, but not silent. A fireplace pops politely. A nearby clock ticks dramatically, as if trying to impress the moon. Your bed has approximately 23 pillows, arranged in a specific geometric code known only to your maid. You lie down and immediately regret it. The mattress is soft. Yes, but aggressively so, like sleeping inside a meringue. Every movement sinks you deeper, until you're unsure whether you're sleeping or being gently smothered by luxury. The canopy above you is embroidered with birds, or possibly angels. It's hard to tell in the candlelight. Outside, carriages clatter by, and distant laughter echoes from someone else's late-night scandal, which you now deeply regret not attending. What if it was the scandal? What if it involved someone's second cousin and a forbidden cheese? You toss. You turn. You reposition the same pillow 12 times and question the thread count out loud. Somewhere in the hallway, a servant is silently waiting in case you ring a bell for a nighttime snack. A different blanket, or a full string quartet to lull you to sleep. You consider ringing for all three. Instead, you reach for your bedside reading, a collection of obscure 18th century essays about the nature of virtue, printed in a typeface so small it was clearly meant as punishment. You skim 3 sentences before your eyes begin to blur, which means it's time for phase 2 of the nighttime ritual, lying very still and overthinking everything. Did you say too much at the dinner party? Was your laugh too loud during the bishop story? Did the Comtesse really compliment your cravat, or was it a veiled attack on your tailoring? You spiral. You sigh. You fluff a pillow with unnecessary force. And then, just as you're about to drift off, a thought jolts you upright. Did you leave your new hat at the opera house? The one with the imported ostrich feather and the questionable price tag? You consider getting up. Then remember, you don't get up. You send someone. You ring the bell. A valet materializes. and you say with theatrical nonchalance, "The hat." You know the one. With that taken care of, your eyes begin to close. You dream not of fields and freedom, but of elaborate dinner menus, cryptic glances, and a small dog wearing a monocle. Your subconscious has a budget, and it's not afraid to use it. Because in 1900s Paris, even sleep is a performance. You don't just go to bed, you descend into it. Draped in silk, surrounded by whispers, and lulled into dreams that are scripted, costumed, and reviewed by critics in the morning. Even for the filthy rich, life has its agonies. The horror of running out of imported caviar, the existential dread of being slightly less rich than the people next door, and, worst of all, the tragedy of being forced to attend yet another charity ball. But hey, at least you have heated floors. It turns out that immense privilege comes with its own unique breed of misery. You might be sleeping on a mattress stuffed with the feathers of endangered birds, but that doesn't mean you're immune to the existential chill that creeps in when you realize you're only the third wealthiest person at the soiree. Horror, the threat of slipping down the ranks of the Parisian elite, is enough to keep even the best-dressed insomniac wide awake. Your life is a minefield of minor catastrophes and major inconveniences. Take, for example, the devastating caviar shortage of last Thursday. The kitchen staff broke the news to you as gently as possible, lowering their eyes as though announcing a death in the family. You took it in stride, of course. Only 3 vases were broken and 2 maids fainted. What's the point of power if you can't occasionally overreact to sturgeon population fluctuations? Then there's the ever-present ennui, that sophisticated Parisian brand of boredom. With every comfort met and every desire satisfied, you find yourself locked in mortal combat with monotony. The art of the sigh is perfected. The ability to stare dramatically out the window, thinking of nothing in particular, is your new Olympic sport. You try to cure it with shopping sprees, salon debates, and parties that last until the champagne runs dry, but it always returns. The only thing heavier than your diamond necklace is the weight of having nothing left to want. And let's not forget scandal, a delicacy even more intoxicating than absinthe. Every day brings a fresh wave of anxiety. What if last night's offhand remark about the Comte's waistcoat makes it into the wrong set of ears? Did anyone see you slip away from the masquerade ball with that charming painter? Is the newspaper's gossip column secretly written by your own butler? Reputation is currency, and the exchange rate fluctuates faster than your mood after 3 flutes of champagne. Charity balls present their own brand of suffering. On paper, these events are noble, raising funds for orphans, opera houses, and the maintenance of fountains shaped like Greek gods. In practice, they're elaborate marathons of small talk, endless canapes, and dancing with people you'd pay not to see outside of a formal event. The horror of feigning enthusiasm for yet another silent auction, of smiling graciously as a distant cousin sings off-key for the children. Your only comfort is knowing everyone else is equally miserable, and their feet hurt just as much. Perhaps the most underrated agony, the looming threat of new money, the horror of being mistaken for someone whose wealth came from business, industry, or, heaven forbid, work. You spend countless hours plotting how to look effortlessly rich, yet somehow above all material concerns. It's a tightrope walk of opulence. Enough to impress, never enough to appear needy. All the while, your staff buzzes quietly in the background, ensuring the world runs smoothly. The fire is always lit, the caviar, usually, replenished, the scandals managed as discreetly as possible. Still, beneath the silk and sequins, you worry. You worry about wrinkles, rivals, reputations, and whether your favorite hat is out of fashion before you've even worn it twice. And so, as you recline on your velvet chaise, Comforted by heated floors and the knowledge that your next crisis will probably involve a dessert fork, you face the hardest truth of all. Wealth does not protect you from worry. It simply makes your worries more expensive, more ridiculous, and a lot better dressed. You're surrounded by paintings so valuable that one accidental sneeze could bankrupt a minor duchy. Each new acquisition means your staff has to invent a new place to hang it, like the third guest powder room, or maybe above the staircase where nobody actually walks. You nod sagely at each new masterpiece, pretending to understand the symbolism while secretly wondering if it's supposed to be upside down. This is the peculiar agony of the Belle Epoque art collector. You have more masterpieces than you have wall space, and nowhere left that feels remotely dignified to hang a small Cézanne or a massive, moody portrait of someone else's ancestor. At some point, your private gallery began to resemble a high-stakes puzzle, part museum, part very expensive jigsaw, with the added risk of infuriating your housekeeper and confusing your guests. The process begins innocently enough. You spot something unique at a gallery opening, perhaps a still life featuring sad fruit, or a landscape of somewhere you'd never actually visit. The dealer nods solemnly, whispers a price that makes your monocle tremble, and suddenly you're the proud owner of another piece you don't fully remember bidding on. The next day, it arrives wrapped in velvet, accompanied by a note explaining how it represents the transience of longing, which, in practice, means it's mostly beige and requires its own insurance policy. Soon, the drama begins. The staff must be mobilized for the ceremonial rehanging. Every painting's position is a political act. Moving your cousin's wedding portrait from the main hall to the pantry can launch a family feud. You hold court in the corridor, directing the arrangements with the solemnity of a chess grandmaster. Only instead of pawns and rooks, you're moving around portraits, gilt frames, and the occasional marble bust. Of course, every room must have visual balance. You can't put all the impressionists in one place, or your guests will suspect you're showing favoritism toward people with more color than facial features. The trick is to scatter your treasures artfully, as though you just happened to toss a Renoir next to the umbrella stand, because it brought out the blue in your rainy day galoshes. Sometimes, new acquisitions end up in the oddest places. The cloakroom gets a small Rubens because it needs brightening up. The stairwell is graced with an abstract work so perplexing even your staff avoids eye contact with it. The kitchen acquires a minor Dutch master, allegedly to inspire the cook. Rumor has it, the dog's bed is watched over by a pastel sketch of questionable provenance, which is to say, your great-aunt claims it's a lost Degas, and everyone else calls it the sad ballerina. Of course, you're expected to speak about your collection at length, especially at dinner parties. It's a minefield. Yes, that's a fine example of post-romantic introspection, you say, while desperately hoping no one asks you to explain the brushwork. Your guests nod, squint at a landscape, and pretend to find meaning in the suspiciously wonky trees. You regale them with tales of fierce auctions and personal relationships with artists, never revealing that half your collection arrived on the advice of someone's friend's cousin who knew a critic. There are practical problems too. The threat of sunlight, enemy to all pigment, means your house resembles a series of dimly lit vaults. Your insurance policy is now thicker than some of your art books. Your staff must dust frames with the delicacy of surgeons, and heaven help the maid who accidentally straightens a deliberately askew modernist canvas. Despite all the inconvenience, you wouldn't trade your collection for anything, except perhaps slightly more wall space and slightly less art-related anxiety. You take comfort in the knowledge that, when the time comes for the next big social gathering, you can always rotate a few masterpieces. Invent a new story behind that odd landscape in the powder room, and bask in the subtle envy of guests who must admire art in places they're too polite to mention. Because in 1900s Paris, owning art isn't just a sign of wealth. It's a lifestyle of creative clutter, curated confusion, and a daily dance with dust, prestige, and the eternal question, is that the right way up? Worried about bad humors or that persistent sense of existential dread? Good news. Your private physician has a new cure. It's either leeches, an electric bath, or a glass of mildly radioactive tonic water. In Belle Epoque Paris, wellness means paying someone to terrify you with medical devices that look like props from a Frankenstein audition, then charging extra for discretion. For the filthy rich, staying healthy in 1900s Paris isn't about moderation or common sense. It's about novelty, spectacle, and having the best quackery money can buy. No one wants to be caught with something as boring as a cold. No, you want ailments with character, melancholia, the vapors, or a disordered spleen. Each comes with its own set of bizarre treatments, which are far more likely to amuse your friends than actually cure you. Every household has its own family doctor, whose job description includes not only basic medicine, but also cheerleading for the latest fads, and a discreet silence about the Countess's nerves. When you wake up feeling a little peaky, perhaps from too much champagne and scandal, you ring for the doctor, who arrives with a black bag and an imagination. First, there are leeches. Leeches for headaches. Leeches for backache. Leeches for when your mood is just a bit too 1890s. They are applied with the solemnity of a religious rite, and you are assured that each one was raised on a diet of spring water and positive affirmations. You try not to look at them. You definitely try not to name them. Then there's the electric bath, a bathtub bristling with wires, coils, and things that look suspiciously like whisk attachments. The doctor insists it will stimulate your humors and invigorate your essence. What it actually does is make your hair stand on end and give you a lifelong distrust of anything plugged in. Still, you submit, because last week the Baroness claimed it cured her fear of umbrellas. If electricity is a bit much for your constitution, there's always radium water, bottled in special flasks. It promises to cure everything from ennui to indigestion. It glows gently in the dark, which is apparently a feature, not a bug. Your physician pours you a glass with the gravity of a priest administering communion, and you swallow it bravely, while quietly wondering if your teeth are supposed to tingle like that. And let's not forget the endless parade of herbal tonics, mysterious powders, and imported elixirs from the Orient. These are consumed on the advice of a rotating cast of specialists, spiritualists, mesmerists, phrenologists, and at least one man whose only credential is a magnificent mustache. Each promises vitality, youth, or at the very least, more entertaining dreams. Wellness isn't just about the physical, of course. There are therapies for the mind and soul. You might be prescribed a strict diet of fresh air and introspection, which involves sitting in the garden and writing poetry about your feelings, preferably while being lightly misted with rosewater by an undergardener. Or perhaps it's time for a course of animal magnetism, wherein a practitioner waves their hands over your body and assures you that your magnetic fields are much improved. You nod and pay handsomely. If all else fails, there's always spa tourism. You and your peers will decamp to the latest fashionable health retreat. Mineral springs, mud baths, or alpine air, where you'll submit to cold plunges, vigorous massages, and being wrapped in seaweed by a team of nurses who refuse to answer questions about their credentials. Of course, the true point of all these treatments isn't health, it's gossip. Everyone loves to discuss their latest cure, share horror stories of malfunctioning contraptions, or debate whether the Duke's colour returned because of the new tonic, or because he was caught in a compromising position at the racetrack. In the end, you might not be healthier, but you're certainly entertained, and you've collected enough eccentric stories to last another season of dinner parties. Because in Belle Epoque Paris, the only thing better than being well is being interesting. And ideally, being both. Assuming your physician can find just the right leech. As the city lights of old Paris flicker out and your silk pajamas settle just right, let's take a final, drowsy stroll back through the absurd opulence of Belle Epoque high society. Tonight, you've survived breakfast banquets, dinner, marathons, scandalous salons, and the unspeakable agony of having to choose between 11 hats for one afternoon tea. You've endured being dressed by committee, judged by poodles, and possibly insulted by your own parrot, all while never once having to open your own front door. But beyond the laughter and the lace, there's something quietly impressive about those impossibly rich Parisians. They mastered the fine art of suffering in style, whether that meant braving a new health fad, surviving a 7-hour dinner, or pretending to enjoy the sound of avant-garde opera for the 5th night in a row. They knew how to keep up appearances, manage endless drama upstairs and down, and navigate a world where losing your place at the table was a fate worse than having your chef quit on truffle night. So, as you drift off tonight in your very own bed, clean, cozy, and gloriously free from the burden of keeping up with the Joneses and the Bourbons, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors. Thank them for inventing indoor plumbing, electric lights, and an era where pet monkey in a hat is a lifestyle choice, not a social requirement. Be grateful that your biggest nighttime worry is whether to watch one more episode, not whether your absinthe ritual was performed at precisely the right angle. History, even at its most ridiculous and extravagant, is proof that people will always find ways to outdo, outspend, and outdrama each other. But it's also proof of something softer, our endless creativity, stubborn hope, and ability to laugh at ourselves, no matter how gilded or grimy our surroundings. The world changes, but the need for comfort, warmth, and a good story at the end of the day is eternal. So close your eyes, breathe deep, and let the worries of past and present melt away. You've made it through a day in the life of the filthy rich, and you did it without spilling a single drop of caviar on the carpet. Sleep well, dream easy, and remember, tomorrow's problems can wait. Tonight, you rest. Good night.